first time, federal government employees have the day off in order to commemorate Juneteenth. With his signature yesterday, President Biden made the holiday official. But we could not and cannot confuse symbolic gestures with genuine material, honest-to-God progress. From Renee Graham in the Boston Globe, quote, "Despite the holiday, the racial divide remains impassable and intentional. Just as emancipation was delayed for 250,000 enslaved black people in Texas, we have yet to be granted our full rights. Officially commemorating black freedom is fine, but no substitute for freeing black people from racism. And if we fail to recognize and challenge the difference, we'll keep getting symbolic crumbs while starving for justice." Joining us now is Renee Graham, Associate Editor and Columnist at the Boston Globe, and Dr. Niambi Carter, Associate Professor of Political Science at Howard University. Renee, I'll start with you. Thank you for your article. You captured exactly how I feel about these kinds of holidays, but I want you to speak to something here. There is a concern that we often hear, sort of publicly and politically, that complaining about something like Juneteenth shows a lack of appreciation for the people who fought to get the holiday. Can you sort of explain this idea that you can celebrate this holiday being created, but it shouldn't be a way to paper over the existing problems that black people still face in this country?
Thanks for having me, Jason. I absolutely salute Ms. Opal Lee, who's a model of grace and persistence. She should have had to fight for decades for something that should have been a given, a Juneteenth holiday. Having said that, there was this sense yesterday of a kind of look what was done, look what we did, almost, not even giving her as much credit for as long as she fought. And the bottom line is that it is a holiday, it is symbolic, and symbols are important, but symbols do not equal change. So, I want to make sure that, when we're talking about Juneteenth, that we also start thinking about what kind of a labyrinth that Ms. Lee is going to have to navigate with these new voter suppression laws in her native Texas. You have to balance these two things out so you can sit back and feel good about the effort was done, but also be well aware that the job is not even close to being finished.
And Dr. Carter, I want to stay on Texas for a minute. So, some symbolic holidays are great, right? We have Martin Luther King Day, which means a whole bunch of seventh graders give Martin Luther King speeches. But when it comes to Juneteenth, this is going to be a holiday that kids will learn about in school, but they're not going to be in school since it happens during the middle of the summer. And we have in Texas, the legislature is now trying to pass a new law, which is not only banning critical race theory, but trying to argue that any teaching about American history or slavery that treats slavery as anything other than an aberration to the American theme would be outlawed. Looking at Juneteenth now, what would we need to focus on about this holiday to kind of counter this kind of racism and this attack on real American education that we see happening across the country right now?
Well, I have to say thank you for having me, and I agree with everything Renee said. I mean, many people are trying to do this holiday, but trying to skirt around why we actually have this holiday to begin with. You had people who were enslaved, and then you had people who were not just lying to them about what happened with the end of the war. There were people who out and out refused to allow these people to be freed, even though enslavement had been outlawed. So I think what we're talking about here is sort of getting something with one hand and having the other thing, the truth, being taken away. And ultimately, more than this holiday, what people need is actual freedom. What people need in this country is actual truth. And what we're going to keep seeing in places like Texas and other places is, we'll give you the holiday, but don't talk about why you actually have it, right? We can't talk about racism. We can't talk about enslavement. And if we keep treating enslavement as a slippage, right, and not as a feature, right, of this country, because it was written into the Constitution, then we'll continue to sort of do these things and feel pleased and self-congratulatory, but have done anything to move the needle.
So 2 weeks ago in this country, most of us weren't necessarily expecting to have this Friday off. This is a brand new holiday that's popped up. And I'm old enough to remember when MLK became a federal holiday, a national holiday, and that feeling, even at the time, even as a kid, it's like, one day MLK is going to be used to sell cars and mattresses. So my question for you, Renee, and then also Dr. Carter, is what should we and how should we be celebrating Juneteenth so that it's not completely captured by marketing and branding like we see these terrible ads coming out by the San Jose Sharks? How can we celebrate this holiday so it doesn't become a commercialized mess within the next 18 months?
well, maybe we should start running around and talking about the war on Juneteenth if suddenly it gets co-opted on Madison Avenue. You know, what I don't want is a version of what's happened to Pride celebrations in this country. I'm old enough to remember when Pride celebrations were about floats, but always with the political heart beating right in front of it. Now you go to a Pride parade and it's politicians, it's products that are branded by department stores and insurance companies. That's not what this is about. I think with Juneteenth, you have to keep the focus on what it is and why it matters, what happened before Juneteenth, but also what's happened after Juneteenth. You know, it's not just enough to give us Juneteenth. We need to talk about tenure. It's not just enough to give us a holiday. We need to talk about, you know, promotions that elevate us to the masthead and to board of directors. You need to talk about it in full and not as this one thing that happened on this one day.
Especially since, Dr. Carter, it's all based on a lie, right? I mean, the core of this holiday is that a large group of white people in Texas lied to black people and denied their freedom for 2 years. When we're talking about this holiday today, some comedians have joked it should only be for black people. Obviously, that's not going to be the case. But how do we celebrate a holiday that basically commemorates black people being lied to yet again?
Well, I think it also commemorates Black agency, and I don't want us to sort of poo-poo that, because it's really important to remember that it was the people in Galveston, it's the folks in Louisiana and other parts of Texas who really were the ones who kept this flame going, who would not let us forget about this. So this is why commemorations are important, and I think if we're going to do anything, we need to follow their lead. But I also think it's worth noting that on this day of Jubilee, right, where quite literally you had this signed into law, we're also commemorating the murder of Black people in church. Right. So this has to be part of that narrative, and you can't get the good without the bad. And I think in this country, at least, there is this desire to talk about heroes and talk about all the good things and want to forget all of the negative things that allow this country to be great. And so I think, you know, when we're talking about Juneteenth, we have to, you know, talk about the bitter and the sweet.
You know what? I want Juneteenth to be like a Black Festivus where we can just air grievances for 24 hours and no one can stop us. Renee Graham and Dr. Niambi Carter, thank you for spending some time with us today.
Thank you, Jay.
When we return, why is the leader of the Proud Boys now selling Black Lives Matter t-shirts? I have the answer when we get back.